Let me thank you for requesting of me some information as it pertains to the history of our country. As we are all aware, a country cannot survive in culture and in truth and with the respect and the dignity that should be given to those who have served. And so I take this opportunity, especially at this auspicious moment of our independence, to articulate on matters which I believe are an imperative for the understanding of who have served us before and upon whose shoulders that these who serve today have climbed upon to become that who they are today. We are pleased, of course, to know that our country continues to recognize the culture and the fact that we are, as Dominicans, resilient people, as has been mentioned by those before. And I take this opportunity to say that history must not be ignored. The absence of facts and truth and history will have an effect of undermining the very foundation upon which a nation is built. And as for your question as to who J Seraphin is, I grew up in the Roseau area. I, in fact, was resident in various streets of Roseau. And I was able also to have been subjected to a lot of the difficulties of social class discriminations of the day. However, my parents and my family were very positive and very aggressive. And after building their business in the Fonkole area, they were the fact pioneers of business in Fonkole. We saw that area of Fonkole grow into what it is today. I would like to say that my early beginnings was with insurance companies and was able to travel throughout the Caribbean doing insurance business where I got qualifications with the various institutions that in fact were privileged to act as the mentors of the insurance company that I served, an American insurance company. And I got qualified in the various disciplines of the insurance business. I later came to Dominica and formed an organization that had a lot to do with the culture and the music of Dominica. And at the Green Lantern Club, which was the club, the premier club of the day, where the Deepwater Harbor is now located. That club was in fact the home for the Swinging Stars Band, for Bell's Combo, for the Gaylord's Power Movement, and other bands that were around and about, and that was the premier place of activity for social events in Dominica. It began the trend for Friday night activities in Dominica, and in fact was very, 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 very successful. And so as a young man, I enjoyed the benefits of financial returns from this endeavor. Then I went on to form the Dominica Airways Company and became the premier and pioneer of the aviation business in Dominica, where we transported groups, including Swinging Stars and the Gramax. Their first move out of Dominica was to Guadeloupe, where we transported them free of charge. And at this place, he was able to, that is Joe was able to entertain the publics in Guadeloupe. And with our debts, we launched their campaign. In fact, later on as Prime Minister, I had allowed the Gramax band to play the Super Bowl in Florida. And they played to the most privileged place that they've ever had in their existence as a band. I was also the manager of the Liquid Ice Band of fame here in Dominica, and they practiced at my parents' house, and I was the one who assisted them in forming the name that they became in Dominica's cultural life. I got into politics at a very early age. I, in fact, became the treasurer of the Labour Party when I was merely 24 years old, and became the president of the party later on in my life within my 20s. In 1970, I contested under the control and domination of the Labour Party of the day of Edward LeBlanc, and I contested the Roseau Town Council, a very strong contest in those days because of there was so much political situation surrounding that phase of our history. And I became a minister of government in 1975 for the Roseau Valley constituency. And so it was that I began my journey. Housing, of course, became the critical point of my ministry. And as the Minister of Housing, we were able to establish the Bath Estate and the Kinfield Housing Scheme under the Patrick John government, for which I was primarily directly involved. And even when I was moved to the Minister of Agriculture, I continued as chairman of the Housing Corporation to ensure the completion of those houses. As Minister of Agriculture, it was recognized that that was a point of Dominica's history where the agricultural sector was vibrant, active, and aggressive. We had the coconut rehabilitation program through the Canadian Assistance Program. The cane growers movement was at its peak, as well as was the cooperative movement. Land reform became the critical part of what I was involved with, and particularly in the area of Glogomie and some other public places where we owned lands, the government crown lands were distributed at a level unknown before and after. And so Glogomie and other places of land availability in TFM, including places where we even give lands to the Rastafarian movement under my ministry. These were very, very high points, really, of my activities in government. The whole development of the assistance programs and the aggression of the banana industry was at its focal point, and it was at its peak. I can recall very distinctly the fact that in the Ministry of Communications and Works, we're having come in with a background of aviation, has been the pioneer in Dominica for the local industry of airlines. We had a DC-3, which had 28 passengers and carried 8,000 pounds payload. We were able to, I was able to understand the ramifications of the need for aviation transportation activity, which allowed me, through one of my pilots, to indicate the Kinfield Strip to the government of the British Development Division, so under Sir Bruce Greatbatch. We had a meeting, I introduced the idea of the Kinfield Airport, which came into being and it now exists. It is an imperative that we understand our history well, because even today we are seeing development in certain parts of Dominica, which somehow or the other may have escaped the historians in making mention of the genesis of such activities and the availability of such lands. For example, having acquired, and I believe I would be not incorrect to say that I am very likely the minister and prime minister that then acquired more lands in Dominica in its history. And that included Mont Prosper, Wharton Waven, Trafalgar, Chase, Portsmouth, different lands of Geest in Portsmouth, lands at Layu, and other such places that are too numerous to mention. And so land reform became an agent of growth for the Dominican people. And so today, when we go to the baths in Wharton Waven, we must understand that this was land was owned primarily by the royal family, which was acquired by my government. And indeed, Eugenia Charles, in her time of office, had sought to return those lands, but through court action, it was turned back to the people. So Wharton Waven and the Mont Prosper lands were given back, and Trafalgar lands from T.D. Shillingford and family was also lands that were taken by the government during my time of government. Soufriere Estate also in that year. It must be remembered that I also enjoyed the old mill, it was destroyed by Hurricane David, and again, that's an area of very common use these days, which was supported by the American government through my intervention for the Basic Human Needs Trust Fund. These are some of the major areas of activities which I was involved with as a Minister of Government. But nothing at all can ever compete with the fact that when the nation was in need of meeting its moment of challenge, only 6 months after independence of November 3rd, there was this revolution on 29th of May, and the government had been removed from office. I had resigned earlier because of my difficulties with the infractions and the behavior of the Attorney General, and of which the then Prime Minister, kept supporting that Attorney General for principle. I left, and then I was called upon by the nation through the 26 organizations and its leadership, including the present President of Dominica. It was during that period of time that I was called upon to bring some resolution to the effect of this revolution. It was a mass revolution. The government was removed from power, and there was no government to come in. And the government could only be formed with a leading majority of legislators, of parliamentary representatives in the parliament. And I formed the Democratic Labour Party, and then got members of the Labour Party of Patrick John to join with me and form a coalition government. And that saved the nation. It wasn't too long after that we had Hurricane David. And we all know what happened with Hurricane David. That in fact, it is too long a list to mention, but what has to be said was that we were then exposed to the world stage, where I spoke at the United Nations, at the OAS Assembly, in Ottawa, in Paris, in London, and in diverse places, and met the Consortium of Nations for the CDB in Barbados. And Dominica became special relations, where I was brought in on a state visit to Venezuela, and we formed an alliance of relations which exists today, as well as it did with France. And so that relationship with France continues to be a hallmark of our foreign policy, as we have come to this point where our closest neighbors are Guadeloupe and Martinique. And for this, my particular relationships were significant and continued for many, many years thereafter. I can say that we had in fact overcome the difficulties of a hurricane that was enormous, and through assistance from multi-agencies, including the SOURS, that is the Seventh-day Adventist World Service Housing Program, we were able to overcome quite a lot of the difficulties. And it is understood and accepted that Dominica did go through a quick transition from the horrendous destruction of that hurricane to normalcy. And I was proud to be able to present to Dominica an opportunity for an election that was called through a democratic process, despite the difficulties, the transgressions of the 29th of May of 79 situation. So stability was brought to Dominica. And so in the face of chaos and anarchy came the ability for us as a nation to come back to its senses and to recreate for us that which was brought up by the independence of Dominica, of Britain, in 3rd of November of 78. I recall, of course, that I was with Patrick John and Lee Austin and Vic Revere, the initial group of leaders that went to England to ask for independence. On our return, we did meet with this mob that violated the vehicle upon which we were driving and all of that. So these are experiences that I have that cannot be taken away from me. And despite the fact that there have been so much little have been said, and that's a contradiction of things, but precisely what I want to say, that so little has been said of the legacy of J Seraphin that I'm very happy that you've asked me for this opportunity to express some of those information, which is probably very quiet in the minds of many and unknown to most. At this point, let me say that Dominica has become a country that may have lost some of its initial thrust, particularly in the cooperative movement, and the agricultural sector have not become as dynamic and aggressive as it used to be. But there is still a chance, and I'm sure that we can continue to persevere and to find opportunities to do so and to develop and to grow and to become the nation that we all, as members of our community of this land, would like to see, that we can advance and become just who we are. I can say also that during the time of government that I was involved with, that the Dominica coconut products grew because of the oils and fats conferences that I attended with Philip Nassif, where certain price arrangements were being made that ensured the success of, that company to make profits by selling oils within the region. In addition to that, too, was the assistance given to the coconut rehabilitation program from Canada that allowed a lot of coconut to be grown in this country, that provided the basis upon which the needs of the factory was met by the farmers by certain arrangements that would cause the Nasi family to become so powerful and very successful at that coconut products development program, which assisted the farmers for the sale of their copra. And so also we can recall that we had Ross University. And I too was involved with Ross University at a critical point when Ross wanted to expand, having just come from a small effort in the Castaways Hotel. And I was able to ensure that they got lands in Portsmouth, which led to the new multi-million-dollar development program. And already peasants became millionaires with houses that are 3 stories and 4-story houses in Portsmouth. And so, despite the fact that the government of the opposition were hostile to Ross and initially, however, I was able to give to Ross the permission and to grant them the licenses to operate from Portsmouth, and that led to the Ross University's participation in the development process of Dominica, which may at this time be in need of being re-energized and reintroduced through whatever means necessary. Leaving the political sphere, I became involved with the development of the private sector through being a founder member of the Dominica Hotel and Tourism Association, as well as the Eco Inns and Sites and Services Organization of Dominica, which is a small hotel associations of which I was a president and founder member. I too, with my wife, was involved in the craft sector. And post-elections of 1985, we embarked upon a series of activities throughout the world, including as far as Europe, in London, in Berlin, in Paris, and in different parts of the United States. We were also those who brought out the craft sector abilities with the Workshop for the Blind and Trafalgar and Loda and Penville and the Carib Territory, which I called the Carib Territory at that time. And we were able to introduce the craft of Dominica throughout the world. And we also got a lot of awards in the St. Croix Agricultural Food Fair, St. Thomas, and in Tortola as well. And so I became very vibrant in the private sector. I did shipping and was become probably the premier exporter of agricultural produce, particularly to the islands like Tortola, St. Martin in particular, and in fact Antigua. And then later on became involved with the shipping program, where I was associated with the shipping of produce for some of the farmers, working with no other than Papi Baptist, for example. And then later on had other interludes with other persons with other boats, and was able to establish a very vibrant movement of agricultural produce from Dominica to the islands. Indeed, I also became involved in the fishing sector and produced a boat called the White Seal, which is a multi-million-dollar boat, which was very high-end for the development of longline fishing. And then, of course, came Floral Gardens, a premier eco-inn, which was established at the Concord and then became location where persons recognized. In fact, we received many international awards for such a hotel of a description that represented the nature island. And so it was also that I got involved with the sand business, where when Dominica had its problems with the sand that came down at Layo, I was able to establish a relationship with a company from Martinique, Tipicodino, and we were able to clear the sands that had stockpiled in Layo. And later on, I was told by a certain minister of government that I had to cease operations because I was contaminating the waters of Layo, and my operations came to an end. Except that I am reflecting on the fact that people are still there many years later in that same Layo River, seeking sand for production and for sale overseas. I was denied that opportunity. However, as I continued, I did bring back to Dominica not an airline called Dominic Airways, which was to move agricultural produce, which I did to Antigua on a regular basis until I couldn't sustain the lack of production that would meet the demands of the market, and that operation had to come to an end. I did come up with several more ideas as the time went rolled by to ensure that Dominica continued to be in the eyes of the world, and one of which was Bitcoin, which was of course recognized as being a joke to some, but turns out to be in fact an extraordinarily very aggressive and positive means of international renown, Bitcoin. They wanted to be in Dominica as their first country of abode, but that was also denied. It must be said too that Monokuma, where presently we have Sam Raphael been very successful, was purchased by one of my investors who I brought down and who I was a consultant to. And through lack of support by certain ministers of government at the time, we had to pull it to a halt. And although we had purchased that land, so Monokuma was purchased from government by my companies of connection, of which I was a director of Vistas, the company that bought that for the purpose of a multi-million-dollar development, which never came to fruition. So there have been moments of despair, but there have been moments of hope. And throughout all of this, I have continued to become who I am. I was introduced by the OECS to become a speaker at the OECS conference in St. Lucia, as well as the OECS and Caribbean conferences in Turks and Caicos, where I spoke on behalf of the need for shipping and agricultural development and marketing. I've also been one who was together associated with a consultancy that produced a consultancy report for trade between Martinique and Dominica. And so I have served my country, and I've served my country to the best of my ability. My legacy will be spoken about more directly in the book that's forthcoming, which is to be launched very, very shortly. And then there will be more information directed at developments and situations of Dominica. But let me be pleased that you have asked me for some information, and I trust that that which you have will suffice for the moment to at least give some people at least a peep into the life of J Seraphin. Thank you very much.